Hey, I'm Dave. Welcome to my shop. According to legend, it is said that every copy of Microsoft Windows included a hidden copy of Microsoft Bob, secretly planted there by one of the original Windows developers. The accuracy of the story and the identity of the developer have never been confirmed. Until today, that is. Because it was me. It's been 25 years, and I'm ready to tell you the real story, the secret history of Microsoft Bob. Microsoft Bob, which was not terrible by the way, at least for its time, failed in the marketplace. And it failed hard, and it failed publicly. It was all the more complicated publicly because of who the marketing manager was on the product, Melinda French. If that name doesn't ring a bell, you might know her better as the now Mrs. Melinda Gates. So yeah, I'm sure Bill was watching when Bob went down in flames, but then Bob didn't fail for any lack of marketing. Bob's failure was fundamentally inevitable due to its slow performance on 1995 hardware, and no amount of marketing was going to save it. It could really only have been saved by better code or the faster hardware coming in the future. But how would I know? I'm Dave Plummer, a retired Microsoft operating system developer all the way back to the MS-DOS and Windows 95 days. And while Microsoft wasn't able to sell many copies of Bob and it was quickly canceled, as a big fan of Bob myself, I did what Microsoft couldn't. I shipped a lot of copies of Bob. First by the million, then tens of millions, then hundreds of millions, and ultimately 500 million copies installed on computers worldwide. What? How? Why? Well, that's today's story. But first, we need a quick little refresher on just what Microsoft Bob was all about. Bob was what I would best describe as a cartoon shell for Windows. Instead of a home folder, you had an actual home with a door and a living room and a dog named Rover. There was a private study for your reference apps. There was a large safe for financial things, and so on. Your interaction with the home was guided by Rover, a relative of Clippy, who would provide information and choices along the way. Bob was developed under the codename Utopia, though I had nothing to do with Bob development, nor can I even say I know anyone that did. I was on the early beta, however, so I had it installed on both my machine and my wife's. Neither my wife nor I were really the target market for the app, so I can't really say how well it was designed or not. I honestly think it was one of those things that might have caught on had they stuck with it for 3 versions. I know my wife had a great deal of fun organizing the rooms and her apps and her contacts and calendars and so on, but she was occasionally frustrated beyond measure by a few bugs that would cause her to lose organizational work. It was also a bit slow and demanding of your hardware. How much of that experience was true for other users or what role its quality had in its adoption, one can only speculate. There were even special OEM releases of Bob, such as the rare Gateway 2000 Bob Edition, complete with 5 additional rooms. But alas, Bob just never caught on. And all I got to show for it was this t-shirt. And if Bob is the Microsoft product that people love to hate, it also begat the font that people absolutely love to hate. That's right, Comic Sans. One of the lesser-known secrets of Microsoft Bob is that Comic Sans was specifically designed for, though ultimately not used in the product. In the end, sources estimate that Microsoft sold somewhere around 58,000 copies of Bob. Before I can explain how I shipped 500 million Bobs, I should explain why I did it. And before I explain why I did it, I have to explain a little bit about product activation. You know, those big, long, annoying keys that you have to enter in order to activate Windows, or worse, read over the phone? Yeah, see, that's mine too. With a little help from some really smart friends, I wrote the first version of product activation for Windows, which shipped with Windows XP. Which I'm just mentioning now? Yep. You'll notice that I'm always eager to talk about Task Manager and zip folders and Space Cadet Pinball and other stuff I worked on, but I never mentioned product activation. Well, that's because it was a necessary evil. It had to be done. Sorry about that. No one loves product activation, other than maybe accountants and shareholders, but from a technical perspective, it was one of the hardest things I ever worked on. And by the way, when I say some really smart friends, I mean super smart. And I'm also talking about the crypto people. Super smart programmers I can deal with, because even if they're twice as smart as me, I know the vocabulary, and I'm still smart enough to call BS when needed. But with cryptography, who's to say? They could be wearing the emperor's new clothes, but it's hard to know. So you get a couple of them together that don't know each other, and you have them fight it out in a mathematical battle royale of elliptical curve cryptography. No quarter given, none asked. But if they agree, they're probably right, because the last thing any of them want is to be wrong, let alone have the other ones be right first. Their heads are often what I would call door jam bumpingly large in order to accommodate their massive brains, such that normal hats just don't fit well, if at all, and they're generally delicate artistes that operate on a whole other level and in a completely different world. We had one researcher who, after a particular arduous session of math during a meeting, would always need to take an immediate nap. He would literally think so hard that he would tire himself right out. I also remember a series of conference calls we had with a contract mathematician whose skills were so specialized that she lived in another country entirely, many time zones away. Early in the life of activation, one of the master keys got leaked. It could ruin the whole activation effort, so it was a big deal. And we were working on a way between systems and operations and the crypto folks to be able to disable the leaked key somehow. We would have a series of conference calls over the course of a week, and this math head stressed every day that we had to call before 5 p.m. because at 5 p.m. she was baking brownies and she just couldn't talk after that. Being a crypto gal, I assumed that was code for something. The mind marvels at it, but I had no idea what she meant, so we just made sure to call early. One day we called, however, a little too late. I looked at my watch to see it was only 4:20, but apparently in her time zone it was well past 5, and she had already baked the brownies. She still took the call, and she thought it was quite hilarious. In fact, she thought pretty much everything was quite hilarious. Unfortunately, she was also summarily unable to do any useful amount of actual math, so our questions would have to wait for the morning. Why is any of this important? Because we used her math to protect the product in such a way that your activation key only works with the type of CD it was intended for, retail, OEM, and so on. For that protection to be at all secure, there had to be some big differences between the retail and OEM CDs, and they had to be mathematically different in a non-compressible way. That's because I didn't want a crack for activations showing up on the Usenet forums 30 minutes after release. In those pre-2K internet days, hosting or posting a large binary was so prohibitively complicated or expensive that all I had to do was ensure that the CDs were different by many megabytes of information, and that would solve about 95% of those easy piracy cases. We decided to fill up some of the spare room on the CDs with digital ballast that was encrypted and signed specific to the CD version. We could confirm the ballast signature and thereby confirm that you had the right disk. But what should it be made up of? Tempting though it might be, I couldn't just zip up a copy of my driver's license photo. Photos are not very random to start with, and there are about a dozen other reasons why that's just a bad idea. So I needed some big digital blobs that I knew could not be compressed any further. Where to find data that I knew we had a license to and that I trusted to be as pre-compressed as possible that I could then highly encrypt. I knew from my MS-DOS days that the floppy images we shipped for products were about as good as it gets, and for obvious reasons. Floppies cost money. They were super compressed as we mathematically knew how to do. So I'd start with some floppy images. That's when I decided to do something that would make me smile. Something that only I knew about. I decided to secretly start with Microsoft Bob. In those days, we as a company had 3 big servers. Products 1, Products 2, and Boneyard. Between them, the image of pretty much every product we had ever made was up there somewhere. I grabbed the compressed floppy images for Microsoft Bob and concatenated them into a single large Bob blob. I then encrypted the blob of Bob with several passes of different encryption tools and techniques, including a huge private-public key pair generated by long sequences of random mouse movements and so on. I did a few other procedures that I felt were important to the process, and out came a giant multi-megabyte blob of Bob that I could effectively treat as a root of trust on the CD. If you had the OEM blob, you could use an OEM license key. If you had the retail blob, you had to use a retail key. Though he learned of the story after the fact, as super developer and general super genius Raymond Chen has aptly said of the issue, in some ways, Microsoft Bob was more useful to us dead than alive. I don't know how many copies of Bob were originally sold. If you ask Google, the answer is 58,000 copies. But in encrypted digital form, the spirit of Bob has gone on to live in the form of 500 million Windows XP installations. Now, what does this all mean in a practical sense? Does it mean that with a single password that only I know, we could unleash 500 million Bobs upon the world? Do I have legions of rovers standing by worldwide to do my digital bidding, ready to rise upon a single command? Well, not exactly. Like the important product formulas for Coca-Cola and KFC, you don't just store the whole Bob recipe in one place. The key is multi-part, and only part of it is stored up here. The other parts are elsewhere. Can anyone prove any of this? Well, not without the full password, and it's been 25 years and I never wrote it down. Do I even remember my password? And if I do, is it even the right password? And if it is, what if I typed it wrong just once the first time? Can the Bob binary even be decrypted? I don't know. I'm a busy man. I haven't actually checked. Maybe that's because the whole thing is moot. Maybe I was smart enough to XOR the data with CryptGen random. It's so long ago, who's to say? The older I get, the smarter I used to be. What's ultimately important is that while Bob never got to play on the big stage, he always followed the band around and got to ride on the bus. If you'd like to hear more Windows war stories from one of the guys in the trenches, please be sure to subscribe to Dave's Garage and turn on the bell icon and personal recommendations. That way you'll be notified of future episodes. This video is a bit of a test of a new direction for me on the channel, so if you found it entertaining, please drop me a like on the video so I know how people feel about it. And yes, I'm absolutely using war stories ironically. My sincere thanks to the men and women who have actual war stories. Thanks for joining me here today in Dave's Garage. In the meantime and in between time, I hope to see you next time. And just to be clear, I retired from Microsoft more than 15 years ago. While I was there a long time, and I'm nothing but proud of the work we did, I am not now, nor was I ever, an official spokesperson for the company. All opinions are mine alone. Cheers!